The incoming Trump administration will have several global hotspots to deal with, from Ukraine to the Middle East, and now there's political unrest in South Korea. Joining us now, Elbridge Colby, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the first Trump administration. And it is good to see you this morning, Bridge. We talked a little bit about yesterday that you just never know where some trouble is going to. I mean, the South Korea thing. Did you have? Was that on your radar screen?
That was not on my radar screen, Joe, and great to be with you. I think that surprised everyone, including, it appears, South Korea's top general. But I think what you can see going on in the world right now is a lot of change. I mean, President Biden is leaving a terrible situation. I think this can't be stressed enough. We're at the bottom of the barrel in our weapons in Ukraine. It's being reported that Russia's helping North Korea's nuclear program. Iran's on the brink of a nuclear weapon, et cetera, et cetera. But what you see right now, I think, is a lot of changes because from President-elect Trump, you know, he's famous for the art of the deal. But I think what you see is the art of leverage and putting it to the advantage of the American people for an America First agenda that also helps a lot of our allies out. And I think you see right now the results, including from some of the people who've been most critical of Trump. I mean, you had Justin Trudeau come running to Mar-a-Lago. You've had Sheinbaum. These people kept trying to impress him and satisfy his reasonable criteria on the border on things like defense spending. President Macron has been very critical of President Trump, invites him to the reopening of Notre Dame. You also have sort of I mean, Trump is sort of famous for having this sort of good fortune of his enemies or rivals self-destruct. And I think you see that as well. Obviously, you've seen Joe Biden's ignominious pardon of Hunter, which you were just talking about, Joe. But also, I mean, President Yoon's very closely associated with President Biden. Prime Minister Kishida in Japan, his government's fallen. Olaf Scholz, who gave Joe Biden a big medal, his government is falling. So I think you see real opportunity. And you see, contrary to a lot of the media hype, you see a lot of people really willing to work, not only the ones who've been critical, but Prime Minister Modi in India, Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. The Ukrainians just came and met with Trump's transition team on the peace there, and you've had positive signs from the Russians about a peace deal. And even China, the journal is reporting that Xi Jinping's trying to get a phone call. So I think you see a lot of positive dynamic, and it can't happen soon enough.
A lot of these things seem to be going, I hesitate to say our way, but maybe the world's way for some calming some things down. But when you make threats like the threat we saw and the language used about Hamas and hell's going to rain down and things like that, I guess that's possible with Hamas. If you did the same thing with Iran, could that turn out badly? If you did the same thing with Putin or President Xi, could any of those things result in exacerbating a situation, getting somewhere we don't want to be, from almost the stick we're carrying is even too big because you have to use it at some point?
Well, I think on this point of leverage, Joe, President Trump is, I think people respect him. People know he'll follow through. The Soleimani raid, for instance. I think a couple of things that I'd say about that. President Trump isn't saying, the Middle East needs to democratize or I'm going to invade every country in the region. I don't expect every government to look like the state government in Iowa. He's saying, give up the hostages. And I mean, that's something similar to what President Reagan did in 1980. And I think that's reasonable. And we know from the track record that it worked to deter Vladimir Putin from moving into Ukraine in his first term. And so I think it's coupling a reputation for being willing to go there to being willing to use leverage, economic, even military in certain circumstances, but in the pursuit of reasonable goals of ultimately of peace and of letting, hostages go, especially American hostages, as he ran on in the campaign.
Switching gears entirely, what do you have a feel? Were you a backer of the pick for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Bridge?
And I'm a supporter.
You are, but you should point out it could be you if it's not him.
Well, I don't know where those reports are coming from. I think Pete Hegseth is President Trump's nominee, and I support him. I think he's got a great record as a combat veteran, as a very charismatic figure in the veterans and defense issues. And I think he'd be a great Secretary of Defense.
What are the odds at this point? I can't tell. I don't know how these things work. Nobody does. You keep defending until all of a sudden it becomes clear that maybe it doesn't happen. Are we in that position, or do you think the tide has turned in favor of his eventual confirmation? Because you can't lose too many of the Republican senators.
Well, look, I think Pete Hegseth's been out there in the Senate making the case as well as on media. He's got a lot of allies coming out for him, vouching for him. I think my view is that, frankly, the president of the United States deserves a presumption that the people that he nominates, should be the ones who serve in those positions. I mean, I think we talked a little bit earlier. What do this pick mean or that pick mean? I think this is Donald Trump's agenda. It's putting Americans first. It's ending the forever wars. As he said, I don't start wars, I stop them. So I think that's the way I look at it. In terms of, how the Senate's going to react, that's obviously sort of unpredictable. But I think Pete and others are making a very strong case for why he'd be an excellent Secretary of Defense.
Okay. But, Bridge, we have had Republican senators who've come on and said, not about this pick in particular, just said they're going to take their responsibilities very seriously about oversight and deciding whether they agree with the president's picks on these. And that seems like it is the senator's responsibility, too.
Absolutely. It's in the advice and consent. I think it's worth looking back at the historical basis for some of the confirmation process. I believe the first presidential nominee to be rejected by the Senate was actually John Tower in 1989. So historically, there had obviously been advice and consent, but I think it was a much smoother process. We now have a situation in which even relatively low-level, assistant secretary, uncontroversial positions can take a year or more. So I think absolutely, of course, the senators need to do their role, and the Senate has a vital role that needs to be respected. But I also think, especially in an era of real danger, when the American people have given the president a very clear mandate for change, I think he deserves to have, sort of a presumption of moving forward. Obviously, if somebody has really, something that people didn't know about, or et cetera, that's fully within the rights. I'm not making a kind of constitutional point. I'm making a common sense point. Like, the president should be able to make his government work efficiently and effectively. In most countries in the world, the president or the prime minister just nominates his people and they go ahead right away. We have a situation where it can take years, Republicans or Democrats, for people to get through. And I think, there needs to be a balance here.
It's his own party, is my point, though. If the party chooses to, they do have the numbers to do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you're right, and I think these are assertive people who have their own mandates, and but I'm kind of making more the point that I think you've heard this. I mean, in fact, you even heard it from Democrats like Peter Welch from Vermont saying, look, the president deserves to have his people within reason, and so I think this is more of a matter of degree.